Welcome to the Strengthening Ministry in Crisis and Trauma webinar. I'm Jenny Klaus. I'm an area director with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship in Northern California, and I've been on staff for over 20 years. Given the tenderness of the topic today and the diversity in our attendees, there are InterVarsity staff, students, alumni, ministry partners, church leaders, friends of mine from all over the country. I've decided to make this a webinar and not a Zoom meeting. So I can't see you. You can't see and hear each other, but we're still a community today. So I want to invite you to make comments in the chat box. When the PowerPoint is being shared like it is now, you can exit full screen up at the top and click the chat icon, and then the box will appear to the right. And make sure it says to in the chat box who you're sending the message to. And you want to make sure, right now it's, I think, set automatically on all panelists. So click down to do all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your comments and we can be a community that way. We will also have Q&A at the end. So in the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, you can also enter in questions with your name or anonymously, and then we'll answer those at the end of our webinar today. This webinar is being recorded, so other people can watch it later. My friend and colleague, Adrienne Locke, is running PowerPoint today. Thank you, Adrienne. And I will email you my PowerPoint after the webinar today, so you don't have to feverishly take notes, but still have your pen and paper handy in case you want to add to the notes that you're taking. And I have a couple things for us to do, but yes, you will get the PowerPoints today. So to begin with, we're going to start with a poll. So I'm going to bring that up on your screen. So how have you been feeling this past month? I want you to check all the boxes that apply to you. How have you been feeling? All right, I think you can see it now, the results. So you can look, a lot of people are feeling anxious, having trouble sleeping, irritable, unsure what to do. So these are all common symptoms of trauma. So everyone is experiencing some kind of trauma in the midst of COVID-19 here. This health crisis is affecting us, our bodies, as well as our communities. And I know some of you are in the midst of personal trauma. Others of you are farther along in your healing journey. Some of you may not have personally experienced trauma, but you're walking alongside others who are. So no matter where you are today, I acknowledge just bringing up this topic may be painful. And I admire you for showing up today, for pressing into what Jesus has for you in this dark place. And I honor the risk that you are taking to be here. God loves you, He sees you, and He wants to deepen His relationship with you even now through this webinar. Oh, let's see. We should go back to sharing your screen, Age. I believe that engaging in trauma care is fighting for God's resurrection power in the midst of the destructive evil in the world. So I want to invite you to join me in this pain that can become a gift from God. So let me pray for our time together. Jesus, we thank you. You are here with us. You've experienced what we've experienced. We're not alone. You love us, and you're here. Would you draw us closer to you today? In Jesus' name, amen. Dr. Diane Langberg, a Christian psychologist who has worked 40 years with trauma survivors and clergy, has said that trauma is the greatest mission field of the 21st century. The US government agency that works with mental health reports that 70% of Americans have experienced a traumatic event at least once in their lifetime. Over 223 million Americans have experienced trauma from war, natural disaster, abuse, loss, betrayal, violence, and more. Our context in university is campus ministry, and our context isn't immune to these things either. Students experience sexual assault, death of family or friends, racism on campus, shootings, parental divorce, and more. And today, of course, we're all in the midst of a global health crisis, which has resulted in schools closing, social distancing, a general fear of a virus that we can't control, and thousands of deaths of loved ones. Many organizations and churches, including university, have policies written to guide and protect us and our attenders. So forgive me for a short public service announcement for university staff from the legal department. Staff, please talk with your supervisors. Remember, you're not a professional counselor, and you should encourage your students to see licensed professional counselors in these situations. And to any questions regarding confidentiality, mandatory reporting, etc., should come to the legal risk department before you take any action, unless, of course, the person has threatened to harm himself or herself or others, in which case 911 should be called first, and then the emergency risk hotline. The legal department of our university can help you navigate all these things so you as staff don't have to figure it out on your own. My seminar and my heart for trauma survivors is born out of my own traumatic life experiences. In 2017, a wildfire ripped through my town. We awoke at 3 a.m. to no power and hundreds of text messages on our phone. We left our house, packed up our belongings, and saw the fire on the hills. And we went to our church to be in community there. And then when the morning came, the town, we just realized the destruction. It was a catastrophe. In a matter of those hours overnight, the fire killed 22 people and destroyed over 5,000 homes. Schools were closed, including the universities. They were canceled for weeks. Thousands were homeless, and the city government and the churches were just trying to catch up and figure out how do we serve the needs of our people. And this got me wondering, how are we as a university to respond? How can we support campus leadership? How can we disciple students through such a traumatic event? So I spent my recent sabbatical last semester learning how to minister to people in trauma. I attended a seminar on how to respond to an active shooter. I've read several books, and I attended the American Association for Christian Counselors International Conference to take seminars on trauma. So today my goals are to teach you, one, how to talk with individual traumatized people, and then two, how to care for your community of traumatized people. But let me pause just for a minute. What is God bringing up for you right now? How are you feeling? What do you need from Jesus in this next hour? I'm going to give you a minute just to write down your thoughts of what Jesus is bringing up for you. So when crisis happens, how do we care for the people affected? To help you better understand and care for people in trauma, I want to explain how the mind and body respond to trauma. According to Dr. Sherry Keffer, who holds a doctorate in marriage and family therapy and a master's in theology, there are 3 governing powers in the brain. Each part is equally important and connected to the others, and they work together to regulate the brain, the body, and the emotions. First, the brainstem is our primal brain. It's the part of the brain that works with the body to protect and provide what we need to survive. When horrible things happen, the primal brain moves to action to do whatever is needed to keep us alive. And second, the limbic system, the relational system in our brain. It's the part of the brain that helps us relate to people using the skills of compassion, self-awareness, intuition, and memory. The limbic system sounds the alarm if things aren't going well and works with the primal brain to turn things around. Third, the prefrontal cortex. It's like the boss of the brain, and it's the part of the brain that's thoughtful and rational and helps us consider what to do. It takes up 30% of our brain space, but it can be overruled by the primal brain and the limbic system. So in crisis and trauma, the prefrontal cortex goes offline, leaving the decision-making up to the parts of the brain that are focused on survival and on holding our emotionally charged memories. So without the rational part of our brain working, our brain is hindered in its functioning. And so the brain experiences like an emotional and cognitive concussion. It affects the whole person. So the thinking ability is compromised, leading to confusion, inattention, disorientation, hypervigilance, the difficulty of making decisions, have flashbacks of the event, have memory problems. So these are all cognitive symptoms of trauma. Trauma also impacts behavior. People may have difficulty sleeping, have a change in appetite, isolate themselves from others, may cry a lot or have outbursts of anger. Trauma victims are more prone to accidents and experience a decrease in efficiency. Common emotional reactions are shock, guilt, sadness, anxiety, anger. People may experience distressing dreams and feel overwhelmed. And trauma also affects the body physically. Traumatized people may experience an increased heart rate, nausea, sweating, headaches, fatigue. They may have the feeling of a lump in their throat, and they're more susceptible to illness. So as you seek to care for trauma survivors, you must keep these brain and body responses in mind. Trauma affects the whole person. It's like an earthquake has just happened inside them. There's not stable ground anymore. There's chaos, and something that was stable and foundational for security has been taken away from them. So what used to be safe is no longer. A person, their home, school, car, nature, their health. Today, touching people or even being within 6 feet of someone is considered unsafe. So as the wildfire chased them in the car, or their roommate left racist notes in their dorm room, or the man aimed the gun at their head, trauma victims have looked evil in the face. And their lives were unexpectedly overturned. They weren't expecting this. They weren't planning on this. And they're overwhelmed. They're afraid. They've lost their footing as the ground they stand on is no longer stable. And today you may feel that a little bit as well. We don't know when the shelter in place will be lifted, when we can go back to a normal life. So everything feels a little unsteady. To help you have even more compassion for people in trauma, I want to take a few minutes for you to explore your own traumatic experiences. So get out that piece of paper and a pen, and I want you to create a grief timeline. We have kind of an example on the PowerPoint here. What losses have you experienced in life? Even in childhood, what caused you grief? So you can correlate the length or the width of the line with the depth of the pain. A move across the country, maybe, and you lost friends, a pet died, parents divorced, school bullying, maybe you had an injury. Even now, what are you grieving during the COVID-19 crisis? So I want to give you a few minutes to work on your grief timeline. So what feelings were brought up for you as you worked on this? I invite you to write in the chat box so we can be a community together. You don't need to share the events. I'm just asking you to reflect on the feelings that were brought up as you reflected on your grief timeline. So make sure you have it, all panelists and attendees, so we can be a community together. Thanks for starting it off. Withdrawal, yeah. Sadness, feeling unprotected. Oh, that's a good word. Remembering frustration, sadness, hopelessness. Yeah, heartbreak. Yeah, even you can feel it physically. Yeah, these are deep emotions connected to our pain. And so as we listen to trauma victims, if we can tap into that our emotions and those feelings, we'll be able to serve trauma victims with more compassion. Not that we've experienced exactly what they've experienced, but we know the feelings, and we can connect with compassion over those things. Thanks for sharing, everyone. We can be in community together that way. I had another traumatic event happen just last year in my own life. My husband moved out and told me that he wanted a divorce. And I felt betrayed and deceived. My heart was pounding, and it was like a siren went off in my head as I rolled up in a ball on the floor in the corner of my bathroom. I couldn't eat. I lost 20 pounds in 2 months. And I kept remembering what he said and what he looked like when he said it. I quit my church small group to focus my energy on just a few friends. And I didn't know how I would make it financially. Ministry partners still support me. I live in California. How was I going to support myself on a missionary's income? I didn't feel like myself. One time I asked for cash back at the grocery store and then left without getting the cash. Twice I almost rear-ended in another car. And I kept trying to figure out what was wrong with me. I didn't know who to trust. I cried one day when my teenage son lied to me, but I realized the tears are really about my husband. I felt emotionally triggered and sick to my stomach every time I saw advertisements with women not wearing a lot of clothes or read news articles about celebrities having affairs and divorcing. And it took so much strength to just stand up and fight gravity every day. What are you feeling right now? I invite you to write down a feeling or two in the chat box. So you've listened to my story. How are you feeling? Yeah, I feel fear, hopeless, connected, compassion, admiration. I know I feel vulnerable. I'm sharing with you. That's how I'm feeling. Mhm. Um, yeah, there's heaviness. There is heaviness in talking about our deepest pains in life, definitely. Despair. Mhm. I think our tendency is that we like want to fix things and make everyone feel better. But things like this, like my life, they aren't just going to be fixed quickly. I'm broken. And from what I understand, my healing will take years, actually, probably my whole life. Sharing is part of the healing process, crying is part of the healing process. And Jesus didn't avoid the pain in this world. He became a vulnerable baby. He touched lepers. He wept when Lazarus died. And in the Garden of Gethsemane, he agonized, sweating blood, and asked his friends, "Won't you watch and wait with me even 1 hour?" I invite you to engage my story and the story of others in trauma as part of sharing in the suffering, sharing in the fellowship of Christ's sufferings. So will you watch and wait with those of us in our own gardens of Gethsemane? Now, let's put into practice watching and identifying trauma symptoms. So, what trauma symptoms did you hear in my story? I want you to put them in the chat box. Yeah, loss of appetite, distraction. Yep, reliving the moments. The flashbacks, forgetfulness, isolation. Yep. Yeah, the triggers. Yeah, definitely. Let's see, I think also had fear and anxiety around money. And yeah, feeling confused, shock, Disoriented? Yep. Great. Good job identifying the symptoms, because when a trauma victim is sharing, they aren't going to like name everything exactly in the list that I gave you. So you have to filter what they say through that framework. So good job practicing that even with my story. Now we're going to approach how to talk with people in trauma. So listening to their story is really important. Verbalizing what happened helps their brain put the pieces together. And your compassion can help them engage the pain, which is necessary to begin the grieving to healing journey. So when you ask them to share their story, first and foremost, you are practicing the ministry of presence. You are creating a sacred space to build a healthy relationship. So here are some tips to being present and to listening well. First is to be attentive. Slow down. Give your undivided attention, make eye contact. Don't hurry their talking. Don't try to finish their sentences because their brain needs to put the pieces together. So just slow down and be focused on them. Next is to speak heart language, not head language. This is a time to give them space to feel their emotions, to give them space to really share what's on their heart. This isn't a time to argue theology. They may say things that aren't quite like correct all the time theologically, but this isn't a time to argue. Their brain is trying to put things together. Remember, it's not working properly. The rational part has probably gone offline. So you need to let them share their emotions. Don't just try to minimize and say, oh, it's just God's will. We need to give them space for the processing. Third is to utilize active listening. So you need to bear witness to their pain. See it, say it, validate that the event actually happened, affirm that it is horrible. And yeah, you're a witness to the pain, the loss, the grief that you see in them. Don't try to fix them. This isn't a debrief conversation in a varsity staff. This is not a decycle that you need to debrief. This isn't conflict resolution time. This is sitting in the pain and watching and waiting with them for Jesus to show up and meet them. And then finally, honor the sacredness of their stories that they share with you. It is holy ground when someone is honest and vulnerable with you. So honor the risk that they took with you. Often the last thing they tell you is the most painful for them. So really honor the risk that they're taking to share with you. A local flower shop was going out of business a few months ago. So I decided to buy something beautiful for my home. And I picked out a lovely orchid. I think we have a picture of it. I put it right by my bed. The florist was instructing me on how to care for my flower. These leaves need to be pruned. It needed a bigger pot. But then she paused. She looked at me and she said with concern, "Don't do any of that right now. The plant is in shock from being moved. You need to let it adjust to its new environment." Trauma victims are in shock too. They need to adjust to their new environment. So this isn't time for tackling sin issues or reconciling relationships. They need to be tenderly cared for first. So after hearing their story, how you can help care for them is to ask questions to assess their support system. What care they already have in place. You want to help them identify their strengths. If you focus on their pre-existing strengths, then it will help them hold themselves together to get through the initial crisis until they have more capacity to really explore the loss in more depth. And these are questions that first responders are trained to ask, and they're broad spiritually, so you could use them with anybody, but you could always focus them more towards a Christian audience if you know that's who you're talking with. So first, what relationships make you feel the safest? When do you feel the most connected to others? So you want to really draw out this horizontal connection that they have to other people. Who are their safe people? Who can they go to? Who can they be honest with? Who can help watch and wait with them and bear their pain? If they can turn to these safe people, if they know who they are, they can turn to them for support. Second, in what religious practices do you find the most comfort and spiritual connection? What symbols have significant spiritual meaning, hope, strength for you? So this is really trying to draw out what strengths they have in their vertical connection to God. If they can continue these religious practices, it will help them cope and feel grounded through the upheaval. So you can listen and affirm those practices that they're already doing with God and encourage them to keep doing them. Third, what helps you feel safe physically? What can you do to feel safe in your home? Maybe that's candles, comfort food, bubble baths, exercise, music, but you want to help them be attentive to their personal self, their own self-care. Doing these safe things can help them feel relaxed and calm where they live. So you want to help them attend to those things. And then number 4, how easy is it for you to accept help from others? What do you need most right now, and how can I help? Asking what they need empowers them, and helping them get what they need reminds them that people actually there care and are ready to serve and help them. As you listen to them, you might want to pay attention in your own mind of ideas that come up of how you could serve them. I mean, they may have trouble identifying what they need. Remember, their brain isn't working quite properly. So if an idea comes to your mind, you could offer it and see if that is something that would serve them. So we're going to take a few moments right now just to make this real for us. So what are your answers to these questions? Share in the chat box now, maybe an answer to one of these questions. Yeah, that's good to identify. Things have probably changed since we're sheltering in place. How do we make our homes safe places when we're here all the time? Mm-hmm. Yes, that is honest. It can be hard to accept help from others when we're feeling like our worst. Yeah, it does take a lot of vulnerability to ask for help. Gratitude, yeah, practicing that. hmm Being in nature. These are great, great answers. Yeah, the prayer of examine. Maybe you're getting ideas, reading other people's ideas in the chat boxes too. Those encourage you. So to end your time with your trauma, end your time listening to the trauma victim and talking with them, you could do a deep breathing prayer exercise. So inhale what they need from Jesus and hold that for 8 seconds, and then exhale what they need to let go of. And repeat that 3 times. And offering to pray is also practicing the ministry of presence. We're going to practice the breathing exercise at the very end because this has been a heavy webinar, so we will practice that before we get off of our webinar today together. Now, in the middle of crisis is ideally not when you figure out what to do. Creating an emergency plan will give you a clear roadmap of how to care for your whole community when crisis happens. We don't have time to go over all those aspects today, but I want to plant that idea in your mind. The Disaster Ministry Handbook, yes, there is one. It's a really helpful tool in creating your plan, whether you work for InterVarsity or for a church. It's really helpful. And I just want to highlight that having a plan helps you care for your whole community. If you don't have a plan, the people with more resources resources and capacity will fare better through the crisis than those without. So you having a plan helps care for your whole community and addresses the inherent injustices in our society. So a few things that you can do right now is one, you can connect with your broader community. So you can talk with campus leaders, if you're a staff, about how to be involved in their response and care strategy. How can InterVarsity partner with the university? How can InterVarsity partner with the local Christian community? So you can create a list of local health resources. If you don't already have a list of counselors or Christian counselors in your community, you want to have that handy to refer people to. Trauma impacts the function of the brain, as I said, so I really recommend that everyone in trauma see a counselor. Trauma symptoms should lessen after 6 weeks, and if they extend longer, that person should definitely see a counselor. So you need to keep in mind that you're kind of like a first responder in crisis, and the counselor is long-term care. Second, you could commit to walk your community through the trauma. You can understand the long-term disaster recovery expectations. You can prepare for trigger responses and grief on the 1-year anniversary. You can see this disaster psychology chart. Those who study disasters, no matter what the disaster is, the community follows this trajectory. So even now we could begin thinking, next spring, when it's the 1-year anniversary of COVID-19, how might people respond? What might trigger them? How can we care for them? How can we lament the changes in our society? How can we care for people through the long-term healing process of this? And finally, you can care for yourself as a wounded healer. So you're maybe experiencing your own trauma from COVID-19 or other things. And so you need to be practicing your own healthy boundaries, your own self-care, attending to those questions from earlier, meeting with your own counselor or spiritual director so that you can heal while you help others heal. So pay attention to your own healing process and don't let that go to the side. That's really important that you maintain boundaries and self-care in your own healing work in the midst of crisis. So after the wildfire in my town, I joined the network of local churches so InterVarsity could be part of the city recovery plan. And students served in local shelters. They hosted a lament wall on campus. We built a shed for a homeowner who lost everything. And on the 1-year anniversary, we gave flowers to the university president who lost her home in the fires. So those are just a few examples of being involved. I want to invite you to take a few minutes to highlight next steps that you want to take from this training today. What stands out to you from what we've talked about? And I want you to jot a note down. I'll give you a poll too in just a minute. But I just want you to pay attention to Jesus and what he's inviting you to really remember from this webinar. Through the results, we can see how we're learning together and what the Lord has been saying to us. Definitely the most common is growing and offering the ministry of presence to others. That's great. To really focus in on that. Of course, God's also inviting us to grieve, to strengthen our own support systems. Wonderful. Thank you guys for sharing, allowing God to speak to you today. Let's see. So as we near the end here, just a couple things left. Post-traumatic growth is possible, and your leadership and care can support the trauma survivor in becoming a trauma thriver. Trauma can change people in good ways and transform their relationship with God and enable them to become influencers of healing in others' lives. And there are flowers called fire follower flowers. I don't know if you've heard of them. Here's a picture. These are whispering bells. Fireflower flowers have a particular kind of seed that's activated only by flames. Their seeds only germinate when they're stimulated by intense heat. And unlike most plants that take years to grow back after a major blaze, fireflower flowers actually thrive. 6 months after our wildfire, our scorched land was covered in fireflower flowers, including these whispering bells. They hadn't bloomed in over 50 years since the last fire went through. And though many days I feel scorched, and while my marriage is being destroyed, this fire is growing the seeds of my faith. And I stand here today as a witness that growth can come through trauma. I'm a fireflower flower, and I think this is creation's hope for all trauma survivors. Thank you for attending my webinar today. I want to invite you for some Q&A time, and then we'll close with the breathing exercise in a few minutes. So if you have some questions, we'll take a few minutes for you to put them in the Q&A box, and then we'll answer some questions before our breathing exercise. So our first question, what other recommendations do you have for resources for further learning? I think I have a slide about that. I've got some other books and websites that you can refer to that talk about trauma and healing and counseling with that. The Institute for Compassionate Care, they do training for first responders. So that's where I got some of my material as well, that website. And then the government website there. So those are a couple other books and websites that I recommend. Other questions? Great, 2 more. Okay. How have I practiced this and led my children through trauma from the fires and now through COVID-19? Yeah, it's hard. I did I talked through the 5 stages of grieving with my children a few weeks ago and printed out the little trajectory for it. And I asked them to think about where they were in light of stuff in our family and COVID-19. It was really interesting, their responses, because my oldest just didn't really want to engage in the tough conversations. And my youngest was identifying where everybody else in the family was on the grief stages. So I found it interesting. So I tried intentionally through something like that, but I'm also just trying to check in with them emotionally. And then when they do, just in daily life, express something, and just trying to give them space to feel that, to express that, and then ask what they need to feel safe, relaxed, comforted, and then try to meet those needs. So those are some things I'm trying. Let's see. Another question. How should I deal with trauma that I've experienced years before? Is it necessary to revisit those memories and seek help? I think it's, mine's more recent, but I think it's like a continual journey. Dr. Keffer's book mentioned about triggers, that underneath every trigger is an unhealed wound. So if there's still things that trigger you every once in a while, even though it was a while ago, pressing in to what's underneath those triggers to seek healing from Jesus, I think is worth it. For him to really meet you there and transform the pain. And a counselor could help with that, or spiritual director too. I keep reminding myself that triggers are good because I want healing. So when I have them, it's an invitation from Jesus to get more healing. So maybe that perspective might help you in that process. Any other questions? These are great questions. Oh, let's see, here's another one. Oh, there's some in the chat box. Let's see, as a discipler of Christ, when and how do you bring Christ into conversations for non-believers? Let's see. In this setting, I don't know yet. I'm still on the learning beginning end of this. I would think in sharing my own story a little bit, I could connect and show how God has met me and been transforming my life. So just kind of sharing my testimony in that way. But in a first responder type setting where you don't know where people are at and you're just trying to help them get stable ground with those questions, it wouldn't necessarily be first in my mind to press Jesus. I want to just help them find stability where they are. They need coping mechanisms to get through the initial crisis. But if we can keep meeting them, caring for them, offering prayer, we can invite them to have encounters with God with us along the way. How would I engage with people that deny that COVID-19 is a trauma experience? Yes. That is a good question, because I'm a little biased in my own now seeing of trauma. Like, I see trauma a lot more than I used to. But before I experienced these things the past few years, I don't know if I would have been as aware of them myself. It could be like I did earlier with the poll of asking how people are feeling and then identifying that those actually are trauma symptoms. They're part of how your body's reacting to the uncertainty around us. And that is a form of trauma. It's not high level trauma like fighting in a war or a natural disaster, but it's still a form of trauma. Yes, we could talk more about that one later. If I think of other things, I'll let you know. That's my answer off the top of my head. You guys had great questions. How about we end with our breathing exercise? Because we've talked a lot about weighty things, our own grief journeys, and how to care for others in this season and beyond. So let's end with our breathing exercise. So I want you to listen right now. What is it that you need to receive from Jesus? What is it you need to let go of? Maybe you're feeling anxious and you need peace, or maybe you're feeling unloved and you need God's belovedness over you today. But I want just give you a moment to hear from Jesus. What's the word that you need to receive and the word that you need to let go of? All right. All right, so I'll count for us so you don't have to worry about that. We'll do it 3 times. So first, let's take a breath out so we can release before we start our practice. So, okay, so let's breathe in. Hold it. Okay, breathe out. Breathe in. Hold it. Breathe out. Last time, breathe in. Hold it. Breathe out. Jesus, thank you for being with us in this time. We receive from you. We let go of what we can't control. We receive your peace and love and grace to us today. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks for joining in with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll send you the PowerPoint. Bye.